A kingmaker who buried the kings she made, a mother who marched onto the battlefield herself, a regent who bluffed an army into retreat with nothing but nerve, and a farmer who stood up when powerful men sat down. Across African kingdoms, Queen Mother wasn't just a title of respect. In many royal courts, it was a real political office, with land, authority, and in some cases, armies. This is the story of 4 women who held that office and used it to quietly rewrite the rules of power until one of them took it all the way to open war. In 1816, a new king of the Zulu people had ruled for less than a week. His name was Sigujanna. He had just inherited the throne from his father. He would not live to see a second week of his reign. Behind that killing was a woman who had already made herself the most dangerous person in the Zulu royal house. Not with a spear, but with patience, timing, and an unmatched read on power. Her name was Mkabayi kaJama, and Sigujanna's death wasn't her first act of king-making. It wouldn't be her last. Decades earlier, when her father Jama died, the heir, her half-brother Senzangakona, was still too young to rule. Mkabayi did something no Zulu woman had done before. She declared herself regent. It didn't sit well with everyone. She held real power in a society that didn't expect to give it to her, and she kept it for 6 years, until Senzangakona came of age. She stepped back from the throne. But she never stepped back from power. For the rest of her life, the phrase Buzani Mkabayi, consult Mkabayi, became something people actually said at the Zulu royal court before major decisions were made. So when Senzangakona died in 1816 and his son Sigujanna inherited the throne, Mkabayi's read on him was clear. He wouldn't hold the kingdom together. Within about a week, Sigujanna was dead, assassinated with Mkabayi's involvement, clearing the way for another of Senzangakona's sons to take power instead. That son was Shaka. This is not a story of a hero removing an obstacle. It's the story of a woman who had decided, more than once, that a king's life was a fair price for what she believed the kingdom needed. Zulu oral history itself doesn't remember this as righteous. It remembers her as ruthless, feared, and in her own time, resented for it. With Mkabayi's backing, Shaka took the Zulu clan she'd spent her life protecting and forged it into an empire that would reshape southern Africa. But the woman who made Shaka king didn't stay loyal to him forever. As his rule grew harsher, and after the death of his mother Nandi, Mkabayi judged that Shaka, too, had become a danger to the kingdom she'd spent her whole life holding together. So she turned again. This time, she conspired with 2 of Shaka's own brothers, Dingani and Malangana, to assassinate the king she had helped install 12 years earlier. In 1828, Shaka was killed. And then, in a final act that says everything about how Mkabayi operated, she made sure Malangana didn't survive the aftermath either, securing the throne for Dingana alone. 3 kings raised to power, at least 2 of them killed, by a woman who never once sat on the throne herself. Mkabayi wasn't a general. She never commanded an army in open battle. But for over 50 years, no one in the Zulu royal house made a major decision without asking a simple question first. Buzani Mkabayi. Ask Mkabayi. In 1515, an army marched toward Benin City, and the soldiers meant to stop them were already beaten before the battle began. A bird flew over the column, screeching, wings flailing. To the Benin soldiers, this was an omen, and the royal diviners agreed. They called for retreat. Disaster, they said, was coming. The army was seconds from falling apart before a single spear had been thrown. One person refused to accept that. Her name was Idia, mother of the king, and she was standing on that battlefield herself. She ordered the bird shot down. Then she rallied the soldiers herself, refusing to let a bad omen decide the fate of her son's kingdom. The army that had nearly broken marched instead into one of Benin's most important victories. This is the story of
Idia,
the first woman ever to hold the title Ioba, Queen Mother of Benin. But she'd already been fighting for her son's throne long before that battlefield. When her husband, Oba Ozolua, died, the throne was contested between two sons,
Esegi,
Idia's son, and his brother Arhuaran. Tradition holds that Idia personally helped raise and mobilize the army that secured his claim, defeating his brother's forces and putting her son on the throne. It nearly cost
Idia
her own life. Custom demanded that a new king's mother be put to death to remove any rival influence over the throne.
Esegi
Broke that tradition to protect her, hiding her, and eventually abolishing the custom altogether. Then came the Ida War, the battle that would define her legacy. Benin's forces, already fractured by earlier defeats, faced a real threat of being overrun. Idia didn't just advise from the palace. Tradition holds she marched to war in her own war dress, led troops alongside her son, and personally turned the tide. Benin won, and in gratitude,
Esegi
created a title that had never existed before. Ioba, Queen Mother, with her own court, her own lands, real political authority separate from the king's. To honor her further, Benin's artisans carved her likeness into ivory. In 1897, British forces stormed Benin City in what's now called the Punitive Expedition, burning the palace, looting thousands of its artworks. Idia's mask was among them. Today it sits in the British Museum in London, not in Benin, not among the people who carved it to honor a queen who helped save their kingdom. Nigeria's own artisans carved replicas when the original wasn't returned, and
Idia's
face became a symbol of black cultural pride worldwide at Festac 77 in 1977. Formal requests for the original's return continue to this day.
Idia
Didn't just protect a kingdom from behind its throne. Tradition remembers her walking onto the battlefield itself. Centuries later, her face is still waiting to come home. Before sunrise, in the early 1820s, a war camp on the southern African highveld lay almost defenseless. Its warriors were away. Only the old, the young, and the women remained, and an army was closing in. The regent in charge of that camp had seconds to decide: run or make the enemy believe there was something here worth fearing. She chose the second option. She ordered every able-bodied man left in camp, the elderly, the ones too old to fight, into battle formation, not with spears, with reed mats and farming hoes, held high enough from far enough away to look like a wall of raised weapons. From a distance, in the low light, it worked. The attacking force hesitated, unwilling to charge what looked like a prepared, armed defense. That hesitation was enough. Her name was Manthatisi, regent of the Tlokwa people, and that single act of nerve in 1822 is one of the reasons her name still survives 2 centuries later. This is the story of a queen mother who didn't rule from a distance. She ruled from the front line of one of the most violent periods in southern African history, the Mafekan. When Manthatisi's husband died, their son Sekonyela was still too young to lead, so she became regent and inherited a kingdom about to be swallowed by chaos. Zulu military expansion under Shaka was triggering a chain reaction across the region. Nations collapsing, refugees fleeing, and everyone fighting over the same shrinking land. Manthatisi didn't just manage that chaos from behind a throne. She led her people directly through it, commanding raids to secure cattle and survival, forming alliances, and making the calls that decided whether the Tlokwa would be absorbed and erased like so many others, or survive intact. At her height, she led a following estimated at 40,000 people. Not every battle went her way. She suffered real defeats, real retreats, but the Tlokwa endured, displaced, tested, but never erased. And here's where her story gets strange. As word of her spread beyond her own people, colonial-era travelers turned her into a myth, describing her as a giant, sometimes with a single eye in the middle of her forehead, commanding impossible hordes. None of it was true. It tells you something instead about outside observers who couldn't process a woman leading her people through war as ordinary political reality. So they turned her into a monster instead of a leader. Mkabayi decided who sat on a throne. Idia protected one from behind it. Manthatisi never had the luxury of a throne to stand behind. She just had to keep moving forward and bring 40,000 people with her. In March of 1900, in Kumasi, the chiefs of the Ashanti Empire sat in stunned silence. Their king was already gone, exiled by the British years earlier. Now the colonial governor had demanded something no Ashanti had ever been asked to surrender: the golden stool, believed to hold the very soul of their nation. No one moved. The most powerful men in the empire sat frozen, unwilling to be the first to call for war against the British Empire. Then one person stood up, Asantewaa, Queen Mother of Ijisu. And this wasn't the first time she'd been the one left standing when powerful men hesitated. She fired a rifle into the air, gave the chiefs an ultimatum they wouldn't forget. If the men of Asante would not go forward, the women would. And by the time the sound faded, the room had made its decision. That night, she was named commander of the Ashanti forces, the first woman ever given that role. If you've seen our video on the 5 African kingdoms Europe feared most, you know what happens next. But here's what most people don't know: how she got the standing to make that call in the first place. She wasn't a stranger to command. Years earlier, as Ohamaa, Queen Mother, a real political office with its own land and authority, she'd named her own grandson as ruler of Edweso. When the British exiled him alongside the Asantehene in 1896, Asantewaa didn't step aside. As the ranking authority left standing, she became regent, running Edweso herself for years before the war that made her famous. By 1900, she wasn't a grandmother reacting to a crisis. She was a head of state who'd already been governing one. For months, her forces laid siege to the British fort at Kumasi, holding thousands of colonial troops in place. Britain sent reinforcements, over 1,000 additional soldiers, backed by machine guns the Ashanti had no answer for. By September, the Ashanti forces were overwhelmed. Asantewaa was captured and exiled to the Seychelles. She died there in 1921, never returning to Ashanti soil. But the British never got what they came for. Despite capturing Kumasi, despite exiling her and her fellow leaders, they never found the golden stool. It stayed hidden, exactly where it belonged. Mkabayi decided who sat on a throne. Idia protected one from behind it. Manthatisi led with no throne to stand behind at all. Asantewaa had already been running a government of her own. And when the moment came, she turned that authority into an army. 4 women, 4 different paths to power. None of them waited for permission to lead. If this is the kind of history you didn't get in school, that's exactly why this channel exists. Every week, we dig up the stories Africa's history is built on. Not the sanitized versions, the real ones, cost and all. If you want more of this, subscribe, and let me know in the comments which of these 4 queen mothers you'd want a full episode on. We've already got Moremi of Ife and Nanny of the Maroons coming next. 2 more women who rewrote what defiance looked like
We will never
in very
be
different
slaves
ways.
again
Until
on
then,
this soil.
echoes of the ancients.